Still.
I feel good though.
Yeah, we're gonna have plenty of.
Let's see.
Jerry. Thank you.
In first.
18 and 12.
It might be like some of.
No.
One question for you. Just so you know, when we were talking about 50,000, but that from
Derived?
Yeah.
From
From.
Preliminary, there's a wicked goose that.
Oh, yeah. It's the list of properties that could end up on.
In the 22 sale.
Yes, but I would.
To say, not forfeiting.
It sound like that list is already. It hasn't. So I just wanted to be clear, because at first I read it, I'm like, oh, that's not right. And it was tough because Marcia had, she wasn't here to do the minute. We were like, we need someone to do. No, that's why I was looking at them and I'm like, okay, that just. We will definitely, if we get a quorum,
I didn't even know he was leaving.
we'll make,
I saw it.
for sure. Otherwise, we'll just make some before we send out the next. Like a plan.
I'll read it.
It's taking a lot of time just to, when my office had a lake beside it. The
Yes.
road right out there on the ice, and the ones that were in the water
Anywhere you
fly
like.
in, land, and then slide up the ice. Yeah, 2 or 3 others.
Away, so you don't.
I'm just wondering, like,
I know you miss me this way. You're like.
about the
Poor Pat.
would show up on it. I'm like,
It's so creative.
Anywhere you like, Roger.
Staring him down, I'm like, wow.
I'll be in DC at the end of the month. I was in Topeka. Coastal carrier. Been a couple times this session. It's kind of like flying by. So I'm like, yeah, I'm like.
It seemed to go back. So
It's like a blur driving up there.
like Lawrence was magnificent.
We are busy. Now got a lot of like fun. So
Just from the very minutes.
security, I guess. Yeah. What about you? How are you?
How's it doing?
They're doing good. Our son George took him skiing.
Yeah.
About this.
No.
Yeah. So he was on the sledding, like the morning. Arm. Same arm that he had broken when we were up there 2 years ago.
Oh, no. I'm here to see.
But yeah,
I'm really excited about that. So this is actually portable housing. That is something to be since.
turns out they've got a level 4 trauma center. So we just took him next door and they x-rayed it.
Like I have a total
Real bad.
I'm on like
It's compressed.
I'm really excited about this.
So let's go get a cast. The cast.
Like how cool, like to put that thing together.
Or tighten it up.
Okay, yeah.
We have Alex and line. Kay said she was coming. He
I
said,
know, like everybody's like, ah, I just.
and then,
Sorry, there you go, okay.
So I think you want
Jerome's here.
no, the Olympics are going on.
Oh, yeah, that's funny.
So they're all thinking he's doing like.
I do just a little,
Who's the bunny?
Yeah, exactly.
and we'll do
So like, I'm like,
Thank you.
like, definitely help.
No, you're
One
The
area
other thing too is
here forever.
Elizabeth.
Who's to say?
Got her house on Sunday. She was
Usually is.
yeah, she was feeling bad on Friday.
Like you came in such a weird Saturday.
Hey there.
Jerome,
how are you?
It's not like. It's nothing fighting.
I was gonna say.
Oh, man.
You're doing everything.
No, I really.
I mean, like with the appendix, I mean, kind of like.
They put 3 rates of the tour, one for a
This is
camera.
the first time I've signed in, I think.
Yeah, we're getting.
Endoscopically.
So interesting. They
They
suck it
said
up
they-
and like cut it. and
They
suck it.
stapled both sides.
Small cities versus just hard to see how
Set
they
her
were.
out of there.
Be a lot of people.
She's like,
Yeah, we're trying to, if Kay spends time, we'll at least have four.
I never
We
realized
are
how.
gonna record the meeting for the trustees that are
Like
here.
one of the big strategies of that
The only action item we have today is approval.
land bank.
So,
Oh, okay.
we could switch to the next meeting.
Yeah, yeah.
Not yet.
Um,
Darth Vader.
I don't know, like,
I'll put crocodile thing.
yeah.
Oh, that's a good one.
W's was kind of going through some like transitions right now.
And then we're gonna reference
Executive
two
directors
doctors
to
to
the
the
end.
bylaws and the administrative.
Like, so he left at the end.
I'm still looking for Sia.
That's the way it works. I'm like, how do I answer?
She's in the waiting room. I saw that.
She's here? Okay.
She's there, and here's your.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Here's Southern nonprofit.
Yeah, all right.
Yes, he did.
So like, that's.
Hi, there's Kay. Stack. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time to come out for our Wichita Land Bank Board of Trustees meeting today, March 9th. We are challenged for quorum today, but most of what we've got going is for information. We won't be taking much action. Logan, did we start recording?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. But we are recording today's meeting so that the missing trustees or anybody from the public could watch the meeting. Before we jump into the agenda, I wanted to do a few introductions. Those who were here for our last meeting will know Scott Rigby, Assistant City Manager, was here. He has left the city, and I want to introduce Kathy Sexton. We're here. Kathy has graciously stepped in an interim role as Assistant City Manager for the next 3 to 5 months, right? While the city recruits for another Assistant City Manager. So she's stepped in that role. Since our last meeting, and we talked about staffing for the Land Bank and the Affordable Housing Fund, I want to introduce Logan Bradshaw. She is with the Housing and Community Services Department, and she is stepping in for the program coordinator. And she'll be working hard with the whole team to try and get both the Land Bank and the Affordable Housing Fund stood up. Part of that activity is the movement and reorganization within our department. And that includes moving the public housing division within the new community investments real property section. In doing that, Roger Burright in the back, right there, is also then going to be working with us closely. Roger's been working with the housing department for 26 years and knows those public housing properties that we've been talking about inside, out, and backwards. And we have Marcia Bram up front. She's a clerk within our office, who'll be here to take the meeting minutes. We didn't have somebody present for last month's meeting, so she had to do the minutes just from the video. So when we do get to the minutes, if you do have clarifications, please let us know, but she'll be taking care of the minutes and will be assisting us in setting up meetings, et cetera. We have a packed agenda today, including some guests that are going to be speaking. But before we roll into the agenda, why don't we go ahead and get started with roll call. So I'm showing that we have 4 trustees in attendance, either virtually or in person. So Siobhan, Jerome, Alex, and Kay are present, which gives us a quorum. Okay, we are missed both Gary Schmidt, Marv Schellenberg, and Wes Gallion. Gosh, how could I forget Wes? All requested an excused absence for other conflicts. So, but we'll make sure that they have access to this recording. The only action we have to take, and I know Kay needs to jump off at about 30 minutes in. So the only real board action that we have to take today is the approval, any discussion on the minutes. And Siobhan has agreed to lead the meeting in the absence of both our chair and vice chair. And so at this point, She would be, opening it up for any discussion on the minutes as presented.
Opening up for any discussion or as presented.
Gary,
I had-
thank you.
I was reviewing the minutes and in that section where it discusses the Sedgwick County tax properties eligible for foreclosure, I would just, instead of calling it the 2022 list, call it a preliminary list because that has not yet been published.
Thank you very much. Are there any other adjustments?
Any other adjustments?
Hearing none? You
I'll
wanna-
move approval.
I'm sorry?
I'll move approval of the minutes.
Okay, Kay has made a motion to approve the minutes. Jerome has seconded. And now you want to take a vote.
Okay, take a vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Alex, did you vote? Who's Alex? Alex, are you there? You're muted. I didn't hear him either. I'm sorry?
Ask in the chat for him to record it.
He is not responding. So without a quorum, we're going to have to table the vote on the minutes. Oh, he's typing. Yay.
You ask him in the chat to vote yes for the minutes. There you go.
Oh, someone came into his office. Okay. We need your vote on the approval of the minutes with the adjustment of clarifying that the list of 2022 foreclosures be corrected to read a preliminary list of potential 2022 tax foreclosures. What is your vote? All right. So with a vote of 4-0, the minutes do pass. That is the only item on our agenda today that actually requires board action. We are going to go ahead and move forward to the next item on our agenda, which is an update from code enforcement. So, Chris?
Probably the, so, all right, good afternoon, everyone. Chris Labram, I'm the Director of Metro Area Building and Construction Department, MABCD. So we're here this week after last month's meeting. Mr. Rigby got with me, said there had been discussion when you talk properties and the MABCD role with code enforcement, some of the problem properties that we deal with. So I've got Kaylin Nethercott, who's our neighborhood administrator, with me today. I guess you can tell I had a lot of jalapenos in my sandwich for lunch, right? My tongue must be swollen up. But so Kaylin's here today to answer specific questions, especially if we get into some technical aspects. Just a few quick notes about the departments. We've got 3 divisions within MABCD, fairly diverse department that oversees quite a few things. We, first of all, building and construction, so new construction or remodel of commercial residential properties is kind of our main game, if you will. That's where most of our staff is dedicated. Every project that is built that would require a permit and inspection in the city or the unincorporated county comes through us. We also contract with several small cities quite a bit to assist them in this endeavor, so quite a bit through there. We are a revenue-based department, so we charge the builders and homeowners, contractors, anyone who would be getting permits, a fee for those. That is what is used to fund the bulk of our department. We're limited in how much of that funding we can use in Kaylin's operation to enforce neighborhood code issues. So therefore, we have some city general fund that goes in that. We also, the other division, second division is permitting and licensing. So that oversees all the licensing of contractors and trades personnel in our jurisdiction, and then also manages the permits and the associated records that go with all of our building and trades, land use, et cetera, permits. And that brings us to Kaylin, who oversees neighborhood inspection, which is the housing and the nuisance code, separate from the building code, and deals with a lot of what we would consider the problem properties in our jurisdiction. So specifically, there are three main areas break down in nuisance, which would be premise conditions of a property, condemnation, which would be when we have a home or a house, a structure that is actually to the point that it is structurally unsound and unsafe and has to be dealt with accordingly. Illegal dumping is one that they deal with. Tall grass and weeds falls under the abatement piece. So those are the main areas of focus there. So having said all of that, when the land bank, in the process of land bank committee developing a lot of these, when staff was first working this, we actually had a very conscious effort to keep, at least especially Kaylin's part of our operations separated from this. And there came a point in which she volunteered, but I will say we removed her from those meetings and from those actions because of the role that she fills. And so that is very important that we maintain that distinction on a few areas there, that in no way, shape, or form during our processes does any property ownership ever transfer. So we have no role. If there's a transfer that takes place, that would be completely separate from our role in that. And in no way, shape, or form would we ever want to do anything that could be construed as driving the property towards a specific solution or resolution, such as the land bank, et cetera. We have to, a lot of diligence there to ensure that the property owner's rights are honored and remain intact. Now, from speaking with Scott and others, and in some of our subsequent discussions there, of course, there are areas in our world where the question of what does the data tell a membership like this? What data do we have that may give you leads or areas to follow up on, as well as where that may indicate opportunities. Also probably important is to point out where it may not indicate good opportunities, i.e. things that may be a lot for the land bank to bite off. So with that, I would like to see what specific questions the trustees have for us and what specific discussion you would like, or, points of discussion you would like us to cover. I'll include in that, Jeff, if there's anything that you need to clean up or clarify, or have me clarify in what I just said.
This is Kay. I don't have any questions, but I appreciate you walking us through the distinctions of those roles and who's taking care of each one of them.
And again, if staff or anyone else would like us to expound a little more on that, happy to.
Yeah, Chris, I don't know, do you want to highlight, is it the Board of Code Review and Standards and kind of the process that a property would go through before it ends up in front of the city council?
Okay, good question. So now, and that would specifically address condemnation of a problem structure. So separate from nuisance abatement, which again, premise conditions, those are within the jurisdiction of staff. So there are certain conditions in those where we go through a legal process before we would abate. But generally that legal review is done within a staff process. In the case of a structure, if we're going to declare a structure unsound, that first begins with a housing case. And if we cannot get resolution on that through the housing case, usually what happens is while that housing case is ongoing, the property declines to that level. It may also experience, part of that decline can involve fires, et cetera. Now, if we have a property that is in immediate danger and also is something we could not secure, we have the option to do an emergency condemnation. And that authority resides with us. So we review that very closely, but if we make the call that that would involve also our building official, myself and Kaylin, to determine that this is structurally unsound. Those are often initiated to us by the fire department, a request to get this down because there's problems here and we can't let firefighters go inside. So a lot of things can drive that. Now, in a situation where you have a housing case, we cannot get resolution. Our next step in that is we present it to one of our advisory boards. It's the Board of Building Code Standards and Appeals. It's made up of an engineer, a few architects, all the different classes of contractors that we have, as well as a real estate representative, public at large representative. And they review those cases. We do everything we can to try to get the owner or owner's representatives there to discuss that with them, review those. And, again, we attempt to provide whatever assistance as far as, informational resources and getting them in touch with anyone who could help depending on their plan. But we're mainly at that point asking that they come prepared with a plan, that they understand requirements. Certain things require a contractor, certain things would require engineering, et cetera. So we try to work through that with them. If we do not get resolution there, sometimes we are unable to even get contact with the owner through that. But if we don't get a resolution through that board process, and the board is allowed by policy, the board can grant them up to 6 months and extensions to continue trying to work it if they're showing progress. At the point in which the board does not see a resolution, they will refer it to the city council for a public hearing for condemnation. So then again, it goes before the city council. If the city council condemns the house, then it has been listed as a dangerous and unsafe structure, and pretty much it's going to come down. And that probably is a good point for a board like this, because again, we would have to be very careful not to drive someone to you based on that process. On the other hand, you may have someone in that process that, based on inheriting the property, where they're at with the trust, with the deed, with back taxes, that it may be a good option. However, then now kicking that back to the board, when you look at the condition of houses that we condemn, if the board was to take that house in that situation, you would not even be doing so well as buying a vacant lot. You would be buying probably an unrepairable house that you would have to then get the lot to a buildable condition and then go from there. So you see, it might be a lot to bite off.
I mentioned that about 50% of the time that process results in an outcome that is not demolition by the city.
Yeah, and that is perfect. That's always our goal in those, is to try to get owner compliance in whatever is best for them, whatever their choice and druthers are there. And yes, with condemnations, about half of the time. With the other nuisances that Kaylin deals with, 75 to 80% of the time, we can usually get that through the owner. It's often not as fast as the neighbors would like, but we get there. So I know there's a lot of discussion that could be had there by the land bank, because oftentimes if we do take action, those costs are assessed against the property. So now that's going to come into play with taxes, et cetera. So there may be situations where at the end of all of that, you may have someone who has inherited that situation who may seek assistance from the land bank. I really like some of the things that I've heard. I saw it in minutes from this meeting. I've had some side discussions with individuals on this, but I like the thought of a volunteer group, potentially through the Realtors of South Central Kansas, to where there would be a body that could potentially provide resources in addition to what we can legally do for people with problem properties. And again, a lot of that I know would be informational, but there could potentially help them with deed. Here's what you would need to do to get your deed cleaned up. Here's potential legal resources through Kansas Legal Services that would assist you at low or no cost. Or in a situation where, again, maybe somebody's got, I know I have several properties in the county that are under the situation that owner has passed away. So this would be different, but it does apply. Situation where someone, in those cases, the family does not want to accept the deed because of everything they would accept with it. And the county doesn't have quite the same tools to take care of the property as the city's allowed to do. But you can kind of translate that to a city situation. You may have someone who says, okay, yeah, I inherited a property after potentially a condemnation action, or the house was removed. I've got all these assessments on the taxes. We have and do at times have people ask, could I give this to the city? Could I give this to someone? And so in that point, we would certainly refer them to this board to discuss if that would be a feasible option, and if the board would have the tools, of course, to help them clean that or take care of taxes, deed, etc.
Hi, this is Alex. I just had a question. Does Sheila, do they have some kind of committee at risk like that? I know they're forming a lot of new committees with the intention of trying to get more community engagement. I don't know if this would be something that maybe Sheila would explore, and that would probably alleviate some of the concerns that may come our way, or if we could possibly work together with them. I don't know how that may look like, but I think it's worth exploring.
And Alex, what was the agency reference agency or individual reference you made there? I didn't catch that.
Realtors of South Central Kansas, we call it RISC.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think Sheila, I know they started.
And I know that, and Mr. John Todd is here. I know he's mentioned this before. I think Dennis Cleary is still the chairman of the, that switched, okay.
Yeah, it's Gentry.
So we have representatives here. And again, I know that has been discussed to try to come up with a volunteer, community volunteers and you have legal, real estate type resources that would know how those processes work, be able to help steer folks in a direction that would help. Now, again, we'd have to be very careful with how those intermingle, but I would think that, so if a board like that was in place, this option would be on the list of options that a property owner could utilize to help take care of a problem. Was that at least as much as you were looking for there?
So I just.
That's very helpful.
Apologize for just stepping in. Just trying to get a better understanding of, so you're saying that, I'll say something sure very clear on how much you're involved in verifying that the structure of the property is considered dangerous to the environment. I know that there are some on the list right now that are due for demolition that appearances say they look fine. So I'm just concerned about if we have a way that the land bank can prevent these homes from, being demolished, and especially there's been a substantial amount in the 67214 area for maybe several years. So we're having a lot of land as opposed to homes that could be transitioned into the affordable housing. So just trying to see if there's more steps that could be taken.
And I know, yes, Kaylin's got some info on that. So generally, by the time a house gets to that point, it's going to be in pretty bad shape. Sometimes we have had some that, that initial from the front facade doesn't look like a problem, but you've got a collapsed roof in the back or a broken foundation. Now, where though, that is definitely worth exploring, as we do get, not as often, but we do have some that the biggest problem is owner inaction. can't get an owner to do anything and the house is causing problems for the neighbors. We have huge issues with security of the house and the house is rapidly deteriorating. And in those cases, that might be a great case where some assistance in that could stop that situation and turn it the right way.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kaylin Nethercott. I'm the Neighborhood Inspection Administrator. I just want to speak to a couple things in that question because it's my world. I deal with those details every day. So when Chris talks about having had a property in a housing case, what that means is we've gotten some sort of complaint from the community about the structure or the premise conditions, okay? So we have gone in with our inspection team and the processes that we use to try to resolve those in every way that we can before that is even suggested as a possible candidate for condemnation. During that time, what we've learned through analysis in the last couple of years in particular is that properties do decline rapidly when they're vacant and unsecured. And so we spend a significant amount of resources trying to keep them secured, mowed, and to keep the premises abated. That's an average of about $1,500 a property in the year to year and a half that it takes us to get it through a condemnation process and get it torn down. I brought just a few, and I apologize, I don't have these on slides. I just did not have time to turn them into slides. But I've got some pictures. They're not addressed. It doesn't matter where they are, but these are representative samples of the kinds of homes that are considered for demolition. And so, Sally, would you mind helping me just pass those around to the trustees or anyone who else would like to see those? Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. They're different. They're not handouts. Each one of them is a different property. Each one of them is a different property. So you only have one, Logan. Those are, yeah, like I said, these are just representative samples. I certainly would understand the land bank's wish to save properties whenever possible. That's our wish as well. And again, the process that we use for condemnation works in a result that is not owner demo, or excuse me, that is not demolition by the city in about 50% of the time. So the process itself does work, but there are times when it won't. If the owner is deceased, there's not clear title for the heirs. There's no way for them to get it through probate, or if there's an out-of-state owner, or if the property is just simply abandoned, we have no way to spur action on the owner if we can't involve them. And again, the pictures you're seeing, these are throughout the city. They're not addressed because again, where they are doesn't matter. I want you to see the condition of the properties that are considered for condemnation and recommended through the first public hearing at the Board of Code Standards and Appeals. The attempt to save these properties would have to be much, much earlier in the process than when it has been suggested for condemnation. And I think that's what the Realtors Board and others have been trying to figure out a way, is for that involvement to occur much earlier while they're still salvageable, you know, where there is an investment opportunity that isn't just throwing good money after bad. So again, lots of discussion has happened with this pre-land bank and those sorts of things. I hope that's a little bit helpful and that we've answered in a little bit more detail your questions about that. Did that help?
It did some. I mean, I understand that there are some situations that are abnormal, such as when there's someone deceased or there's some questions with title.
Or when a property's burned.
Right. And so,
I mean, as you saw, many of those had fire damage.
right.
So
Again, I just know it's a complicated situation, but I just, again, was just trying to hope we can come to some sort of solution within the land bank to.
oh, I sure hope you can find a way to be involved earlier in the process.
Right.
That's exactly what I hope you can do.
So the whole thing, sorry, the whole thing on the legal standpoint for, that's a burn house, you're saying that, or, you know, let's say you need to find, I guess, the owner's clear title, that kind of thing. Is that what's standing in the way of trying to figure out how to get the property approach to those people to try to get them to, I mean, we brought up a suggestion about setting up a deal to give them resources to sell the property.
That would have to happen outside of MABCD. We're going to,
Right,
the process we have is a legal process. Jeff Van Zandt will speak to that if we need to. We're not going to deviate out and try to tentacle out, and that's not the purpose of the dilapidated and dangerous structure of what we're doing.
I was just trying to say to generate actual income rather than trying to keep boarding it up and keep taking care of the property is trying to figure out a way to actually get access to the property, someone to buy it, like he was saying on a referrals thing. And I understand that there might be some legal standpoints of figuring out who is.
That would not be within the jurisdiction of MABCD. It might be something that the land bank could do,
Well,
but
that's
it would
what
not be
I'm-
something that we would be able to do. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. I think there's a possibility of, like, there's a couple properties that I know exactly where those are at, actually. So,
Nice to meet you in person, by the way. We've only spoken by phone before.
yeah, I was gonna say, I thought maybe my house on 1711 South Elizabeth was on there, but it's not, so that's good.
Thanks for the tip.
Oh, I got it scheduled for demo, so I've already got the demo permit.
See,
So,
that's resulting in an action other than demo by the city.
I
Thank you
know.
very much for taking care of that.
So anyway, but yeah, I think that there is a big possibility for the land bank to set up some kind of deal so we can actually, those properties, I mean, I know of a few people that would probably buy them and even if they were a fire damage, I mean, they would turn around and rehab them and we could sell those properties to generate income for the land bank and to get them off the books.
You're definitely
just-
going to be somebody to sell it to you or to deed it to you as the land bank. 'Cause
Yeah,
there just isn't always anyone caretaking a property.
right.
So
Okay. All right. Well,
I wish it was.
I think
Make our jobs easier too.
I think the main thing would be is to figure out how it isn't so much the actual property, the damage. I think it would be really the title of seeing how it is able to be to be sold, because that's the biggest thing. And I know you had nothing to do with that.
We don't.
It has to come with the actual title of who owns it, probate, all that stuff. If it's in an estate, who's if it back taxes, if they're not doing it, if they just don't have the money to do it. So, and I know there's so many of those laying around and there's a lot of work involved. So somebody would have to work each one of those properties on title. I'm not sure who that would be, if we would contact a title company to start researching it, to get a hold of some of these people to try to figure that out, or I don't know.
And that is, so that's a possibility. The issue with that comes in is, so if it's a property that's been identified to us or we identify, because the land bank wouldn't be the only resource there, just as you're saying. So how do we make that matchup without me bringing them to you? Because that would be a legal problem. So that's why I bring up if through this action, there's some intermediate mechanism that would also be effective in informing people that this is an avenue that you could start to do that. Now, one challenge that is going to add to that is the way this is being piloted. Of course, we're looking at nodes. I mean, there's a lot of positives to looking at a node, looking to an area where we can focus resources and have a success, get some momentum. So there's a lot of benefit to that, but that also comes with the challenge that it's one more thing you have to get to line up. So in this case too, you'd have that, at least at this point in time, and it also need to be in the right area with all of the right other timing factors. Now, as this grows and is applied beyond that, I think you have more success there, but.
Yes.
Sorry. Are we done
It's
with
a
it?
good discussion. I think it's probably a really good segue to move on into the rest of the agenda. If you're okay.
Yeah, I was asking a question before he asked. Right. That's fine. So what I was alluding to is trying to ascertain when there are issues with title, and do you typically, obviously you can't legally move forward with the demolition process, or do you sometimes when you can't, identify if someone's deceased or there's not.
Do a complete title search on the property prior to the first Board of Code Standards and Appeals meeting. Invitations are issued to that public hearing for owners and interested parties as listed. And that Mr. Van Zandt is the one that reviews that information that we receive from the title company. So yes, we don't necessarily have to have contact to move forward, because sometimes there just isn't anyone to contact, but we make multiple attempts to contact.
So that leads to my next is, have you ever entertained using like Habitat for Humanity, organizations such as that, to come in and turn that property
We
into.
have done that in the past. We pulled one off Condemnation last year because Habitat was in the process of buying it. We learned that during the process, and we just simply pulled it off Condemnation to give them time to address it.
So you don't extend that opportunity to them prior to instead of.
Because we don't own the property.
Right, well, I mean, I'm just asking if there's some sort of way, I'm looking for a solution to maintain the integrity of the home as affordable housing as opposed to demolition and regenerating that income. So that's why I'm asking if that's been explored, that's something we potentially can do.
Sure. I mean, again, not having an active, engaged owner is the barrier to that. If there's no one to engage Habitat for Humanity to buy the property before it's demolished. What I'm saying,
Do so if you have you can demo the property without you having direct contact.
these have been identified as dangerous and dilapidated structures. Let me tell you, there will be people in them, there'll be kids in them, there'll be fires in them. So there is a sense of urgency once they've been identified to work them through that process to some sort of resolution as quickly as possible. Because the costs mount and the risks mount. And that's just unfortunately the reality of what we have to deal with. So.
The other clarifying thing, I think, is that even though they go through a demo, the ownership of the property doesn't change. The owner still owns it, and they own the debt for the demo also, by the way. So simply because they get the authorization to demolish it does not mean they have any right to sell it, do anything with it.
And I think you're correct that there's, in identifying that there is a gap there. Because if we are having a problem contacting owners, pinning down exactly who owns it, you know, that limits us, but that also means that, yeah, nobody's out. Because if somebody comes and says, hey, what can I do about this property? We give them a list. And there are usually people who attend our Board of Code Standards and Appeals hearings who are right there to talk to anybody who shows up, try to help them out, maybe even offers themselves on the properties if they want to. It's a public meeting. So now, as Caitlin pointed out a few times, that's way late in the process for that to happen. So that's one of those gaps. If we had a way, you know, if through these kind of avenues, if there's a way to get people into to get them engaged, to do just what you're saying earlier, then that keeps the property out of that level of dilapidation, which is big. And then now, again, those somehow to bridge that gap where there's resources there that can help get all those things going without putting us in a legal situation where obviously, I've got to be very careful there. We can't identify problem properties and then say, but we got a really, we've got a really good solution for you. So we have to be very equitable in how we apply that. If we give options, we have to make sure we give them equal and full access to every option.
Really, if the house is sound, the last thing we'd probably do is demo it, because with the price of lumber right now,
And
it would be better to salvage the house if all possible, right? Unless the foundation is totally messed up.
We're not,
Yes.
it's the worst of the worst that we're dealing with. So.
Well, great discussion. Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris and Kaylin, for being here and answering questions. I'm sure if any of the trustees have any follow-up questions, they can forward them and we'll be happy to get those answers to you. We're moving on next to the section 3 of our agenda, and I want to invite up Ann Fox, former CEO of Habitat for Humanity here in Wichita. We've had some real robust conversations with this group about identifying properties, particularly for affordable housing, as we're launching and piloting our land bank with a focus on affordable housing. And has been gracious enough to come in and answer questions and kind of provide some insights into, what they're looking for when they're trying to identify potential properties for Habitat homes.
Hey, hi. How many
Thank
minutes
you
do I
so
have, Sally?
I'll let you go from front, but you know me. I know.
Thank you so much. I'm going to jump up and down because the land bank we've been working on for a long time. I remember when Wes Gallion and I invited Dave Yearout to come down from Junction City, God bless his soul, to teach us everything he'd learned about land banks because there's such a necessary piece. I'm handing out a little agenda for the land bank members. I've inquired about you every day for like 2 years since somebody got this project on their desk at City Hall. I'm so excited to be at this moment. And what I want to do is just talk as a nonprofit housing developer, the kind of challenges myself and my other cohorts in the Chodos face in trying to identify properties for us to build on. So thanks for bringing up Habitat for Humanity. We're every day trying to find a place where we could build an affordable home or take a current existing home and flip it for affordable housing. And at the bottom of your agenda, what is affordable housing? This is a quiz. What % of your income should you put toward housing, which would include mortgage, property tax and insurance, or rent, property insurance, and utilities? Anybody want to tell me what % of your income is the appropriate amount to budget for housing?
30%.
Thank you, 30%. That's the HUD answer, has been for a long time. And when we talk, and Wes isn't here to defend himself. Wes, are you online? Wes will say that Wichita Area Builders Association build affordable housing for our community. Well, for a subset of our community, right? It's all relative based on income. So that's why I threw that 52,620 as a area median income. That's 100% area median income. So if you take 30% of that, I got 15,786. And if you divide that by 12, that means 1315 a month would be the amount of the person could spend on housing. And I went to 35% of area median income. Habitat can actually make a person at 35% of area median income a homeowner. And that is currently $5,575 a year for house payments, which divided by 12 would be $464. And Habitat can make somebody a homeowner at that price range if that person is willing to participate and do some educational processes. So you're looking at me funny. Can you believe it? And that's a brand new slab on grade, Energy Star rated home. So we have special processes to build to make that possible. The Chodos do the same thing, but the price point is something that's becoming unreachable. So the cost of land acquisition is really big. So the first challenge that we have in land acquisition, of course, that's the basis of building, especially for home ownership, is to find the owners of the properties we see that are sitting vacant. And so I walked into a discussion that you probably covered a lot of this stuff. Finding Bill Johnson in America is one of the challenges we face in trying to track down a property where we might build. And I use Bill Johnson's names because he's the chairman of the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission currently. And I really wonder if he knows how many Bill Johnsons there are in America. Because, you know, Bill Johnson owns the vacant property at 11th and Green and has for 60 years, according to current records, but nobody knows where in the world he's gone. His neighbors know he moved to Seattle in 1982, and, you know, his kids all left with him. And so tracking down the actual owner is really, really difficult. And there's a lot of data in the world, so you can go to all these searches and you can find all the thousands of Bill Johnsons in America, but nonprofits simply don't have the research ability, the technical support, or the manpower to do that kind of research, even though we do hit the blocks and try to find out what neighbors remember and look at yearbooks and see who was a classmate that might be in touch. It's a very complicated process, especially for vacant properties. A second part of that becomes the ways properties are bought, sold, and titled in America. So that's what I'm talking about when I say handshakes and dead or gone. A lot of property transactions, because lawyers are expensive, are handshake transactions, and the appropriate paperwork doesn't pass with the person who believes they own the property. So my grandma owned this house. When she passed, she deeded it on to me. So it's my property, but was there really a deed? Where was it passed? Has it been filed? Did anybody side for it? When grandma died, did she prove that her ex-husband had signed off on the property because he was once time an owner? And these all become the complexities of finding how truly who owns the property, who has the clear title to it, can we get a clear title to it? And that handshake transaction becomes a real challenge, particularly in lower income areas of our community and in familial transactions. So it's cousin to cousin and it's brother to sister and all these trades that happen. Well, I have grandma's house here, take it. Then it's the people who are owners to the property, but they are actually dead. And if anybody wants to take investment advice from a nonprofit manager, invest in property title insurance companies, because I swear they take no risk. So if a dead man's name is on the title and I can show them the grave site with his name and we can track back and put those together, they might give me clear title to that property, but usually not. And usually there's a 2-year to 15-year waiting period for that title to clear. So obviously I don't want to acquire many properties as a nonprofit far in advance of my ability to develop them, because then I'm still viable or liable for the property tax and the maintenance of that property and any problems that are happening on it, like dumping, et cetera, unsafe structures, et cetera. So for a nonprofit, that's an excessive burden of cost and of inventory to maintain. So I will say that I heard a little discussion about, the land bank doesn't really want to hold a lot of properties in advance. However, there were times we kicked ourselves for not picking up properties sooner, because of the way the value of properties has changed over time and just very rapidly recently. In terms of finding owners, then the third real obstacle is the radio silence. So we finally found the owner, we found a phone number, and that becomes increasingly challenged as we transition from landlines and phone books. Oh, I wish for the old days. I am that person. I wish for the old days in a phone book, as opposed to cell phones, which are typically unpublished and hard to trace, and people track them, and you can block the call when you see that pesky Habitat is calling you again. You just shut it off and we never hear back from you. There's really no incentive to get somebody to go through the land sale transaction. However, when there are special assessments and taxes, sometimes that can incentivize a person to pass it along. But there's a lot of trust issues that come with the transaction of land, because a lot of people have a viewpoint that my land is going to be worth a lot more someday, so I've got to hold on to it until that day comes. And there's actually folks in our community who put their whole retirement savings into buying up vacant lots at tax sale, but then do nothing to develop them. So they become a blighting influence. The city of Topeka actually did a study about 5 years back with Wichita State's research group as the research engine, and they were looking at how a blighted or vacant property on a block impacts your property values. And if there is one blighted or vacant property on a block, and regardless of the income status, that can reduce your property's value up to 20%. And if that's truly not just vacant, but also blighting, that impact is really great on the value that exists there. So putting those properties into viable use is so very important as we try to revitalize, redevelop, repair, rehab. You still need the properties near you to improve as well, but it's a big challenge to get those people to call you back when they have a property that might be redevelopable, because they believe someday it's going to be worth $30,000. Wichita State's real exposure as with a great basketball team really made the people who don't live in our state that own properties and don't live here believe that anything within a mile of Wichita State was going to be worth $10,000 to $20,000, per 50 by 150 foot lot. I've heard all the stories. Wichita State's going to buy us out in about a year, and we're still waiting for that to happen, but that's the perception we have. Then the cost of acquisition, we finally do overcome the barrier of finding that owner, then the cost of acquisition is really high. And a couple of things happen there. People have a sense of the value of that property based on appraisal from the county for taxes, but then there's also what they perceive to be the market value, and then that perceived future value, which I already talked about a little bit. And this is where you see appraisal is not a pure science. Absolutely, when you start looking at vacant lots in our community, see that a vacant lot on this side of the street facing east and this one facing west might have $2,000 difference in the appraised value on the same block. And so, having some sense of parity for the people we want to serve well by purchasing a property at something that really does value their ownership can be really challenging, because there's not really good market measures for the value of that property. Supply and demand is working right now, but not in the favor of those who want to support home ownership or housing that's affordable to people, which are the ones most employed in our community. So we have a lot of retail and hospitality jobs, folks. We have a lot of mid-level jobs that do not make WABA houses affordable. I would be one of those persons, could never afford a WABA built house. So, and that's not because I didn't have enough money to live and that I wasn't working full time. It's because affordability is so relative. And yet I worked in commercial construction for a number of years. We did housing projects, and let me tell you, you cannot make a dime building an affordable house in Wichita, Kansas right now. Lumber doesn't help, concrete doesn't help, availability doesn't help, but this has been the case for a few years, that it's really hard to hit that price point. And we've had to change some of the components of our housing over time in order to try to stay in that affordability point. But I don't see the market coming on board for that population of buyer. And yet we know if we have more homeowners or more people who can't afford their housing reasonably, they will stick with the jobs we need them to fill so that our grandmother has somebody to care for her at the nursing home. And we need that level of housing. The original public housing units were built, Sally can tell you more about this, to allow people who worked full time to be able to afford a place to live. And people who work full-time still can't afford a place to live in our community. 1 out of 10 people in Kansas pay more than 50% of their income on housing. And so this need for land to be held, for affordable home ownership, for affordable rentals becomes really critical. So it's a supply and demand. I told you the lowest price for a Habitat home would be $500 a month. That's with 0% interest on a 20-year mortgage. Great price point, very affordable for a large number of our community. Right next to me, a house that I wanted to flip just got flipped by a market rate flipper, and the rent will be $1,000 a month. And it's a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, slab on grade, built in 1945. So because of the low inventory of homes and the high number of people who've decided they're going to make money flipping, it is incredibly difficult for nonprofits to compete right now on those properties that need rehab or repair, even though we know to take that property for us to take it to a level where we met all codes and had a proper foundation, et cetera, we would put $50,000 to $60,000 into a home like that in order to be able to sell it. So that finding that sweet spot of what can we salvage. And if you want to salvage lumber out of your houses, don't forget Restore Central and West. They'll take your lumber, and it's great stuff to find. Mother Nature is the other thing that adds a lot to our cost of acquisition. Anybody want to guess what Mother Nature gifts us in old established areas of town? They're tall, they're beautiful. We want more of them trees. Trees are really expensive to manage, and on most vacant lots, you will find lots of old trees that are reaching their end point. It's an issue for our community. We have to take some of these trees down because they're dangerous, they're dead, they're going to blow over in the next storm. They, I think, did blow over last week already in the 30-mile-an-hour wind days. That's dangerous, but it is extremely expensive. We've spent up to $20,000 on a 50 by 150 lot just to remove all the old dead trees. And where that fits into the picture of the land bank is going to be an interesting thing to grapple with when you do acquire properties. We want more trees to be planted, obviously, but we can't get life out of something that's dead. And then hidden treasures that we find when we acquire properties, and that's buried foundations and buried trash. And that's, I can't wait for the day we find the train car, because at least it would be kind of exciting. Old concrete isn't a lot of fun, and no museum wants the old concrete. So we haven't found a market for the stuff we unearth. And we unearth a lot of stuff, especially on a vacant property that had a demolition, by the city or by others without going below grade. Then I just want to end with just the importance of finding a way to hold land in our community for affordable housing purposes. And I think that's what the land bank can do so beautifully well. At one time, the nonprofit developers had worked with the county. You can't take away taxes. There's a lot of complications if you want to forgive taxes. But what we were able to demonstrate, this is probably 7 or 8 years ago when we started talking about land banks, is that the city rarely collects those back taxes, especially for special assessments. And so we worked a deal where if a family would donate a property to a nonprofit, then the special assessments would be the special assessment taxes would be forgiven. And that was a great workaround, a great concept, but I think it worked for us 3 times. And in all those cases, we had a really strong relationship with the property owner. Janet Wilson would be the one I would talk about. She was a neighborhood association president for years. Everybody in her neighborhood knew her. We worked with her all the time. And her son told me recently that he thinks his mom would be most proud of the fact that the 3 lots she owned in the center of the city were donated to us. After her death, we built 3 brand new houses, affordable housing for her neighbors. And that gives me chills still because it works, but the frequency of it working was pretty few and far between, again, because of the difficulty in finding these owners and their concerns about their liabilities. And that's the comments I had ready, but I'd be happy to answer any questions, or I don't know if this hit kind of the topics you were hoping to hear about. If you had Byron Adrian up here, or if you had Mr. or Bertha, you'd hear the same story over and over again. These are the issues that are just pervasive, and putting these, I will say, Habitat had focused on a 1/2 square mile from Grove to Hillside and 9th to 13th Street. There were 604 residential lots in that area when we started, of which 108 were vacant because the city had torn down a blighted home, or for some reason a property had been cleared. And so we looked at those 108 as a way to, try to rebuild the neighborhood. Since we've built 71 or 2 or 3 homes in that area, and but that's now attracting the flipper who's going to charge $1,000 in rent. So I hope we didn't inadvertently gentrify the area or set it up for gentrification. Our mortgage terms prevent the people from turning that house and making a profit on its value quickly. But so at the beginning of my time 10 years ago, I could quickly get a vacant property in that area for $1,500 to $2,000. The man who buys all the properties at tax sale, which kind of became my property acquisition partner, he is now requiring $5,500 to start. And we believe that's because he's getting market rate developers, and that's in under 10 years. So that's a lot of growth in perceived value in that period of time. And again, that's perception of the person who owns the property, but also we can't get it any cheaper than that as the number of lots go down. So, and as we've kind of reached the saturation point for our work in that area. Any questions? Sally?
I have a question.
Share.
You did. Thank you so much. I did have a little bit of a question here.
Sure.
On, you talked a little bit about your Rock the Block and the advantages. Could you touch a little bit on the advantages of working on multiple properties in the same general location?
Okay, I'm going to give you an answer you might not be expecting entirely. But when I started at Habitat, we were doing shop program developments where we would buy, 2.5 to 3 acres in one case, in a couple cases, 5 to 7. And we built 40 to 45 Habitat homes in a concentrated area where we also built the infrastructure. Number one, shop program is a federally funded program. It's pretty robust. There's a lot of support for it on the Hill. So we see it being continued to fund and increase funding, but it's a grant of 75 cents grant, 25% payback. And that 25% payback was killing us because we couldn't afford to pay that 25%, much less the 100%. And these families, of course, a $500 house payment, they cannot afford a special taxes. So that's why urban infill becomes really important, because the infrastructure exists. The infrastructure is very difficult now. 45 families who earn less than 80% of area median income living in one neighborhood is, to me, farmer girl, is like the weakness of an orchard compared to a forest. I have the apple orchard, one disease comes, it wipes it all out. So COVID comes, the families in those areas are struggling so bad, and there's 45 of them in a small area. There's single parents trying to manage kids who are home alone, not at school, they can't afford help. The issues, I could not stay in the shoes of one of the people living in that community, and I don't have any neighbors who are any better off than me. Even though I'm stabilized, I'm not better. What we saw in the Rock the Block area is there are existing owner-occupied homes where there's a grandma in every block, and she knows when my kids are out, and she is the noisy Nelly who lets me know when they're making too much noise, when they're where they shouldn't be. And the richness and the strength of a community where you have mixed income, mixed age, mixed ethnicity. Let me tell you, that area has the best neighborhood dinners because you have every ethnic food you can think of is represented. People know each other, they work together. The benefit to building in a nodal method within a focus area and not just exclusively, like if we would have wiped out 2 blocks of existing rental properties and rebuilt, I am confident we would not have had the same result. This way, we have a few houses here, a few houses here within a half square mile. So, 70 in a half square mile with some elderly neighbors, with some, actually Mennonite has built homes in the area, so has Power CDC, so has RHS, Residential Housing Services. I think Hevis Harding with the new Chodo is about to build on a lot in that area. So there's also others who are building at a little different price points. And the rehabs that are going on to keep the owner occupied houses in place and livable for the elderly folks is really, really important. So I think you can really see an impact from the community, the stability of the community when you're focusing in an area, but I would totally be a little afraid about just, blanketing an area exclusively without considering mixed income, et cetera. My dream for the world would be that every developer, and this, Wes gets shorter when I stand over him to say this, if every developer preserved 10% of the lots within their development for affordable housing for the people in that neighborhood, then we'd have the ideal setting for America. And we'd all be happier for it. So, because these folks are people with whom you can have rich relationships and they're the salt of the earth. Amen. That was a big answer to that little question, wasn't it? So I think you have a great impact when you have a focus area. I would be concerned if you were not accepting some opportunities for land because it might have to sit 15 years anyway to get clear title if it's a buildable property that nothing's been happening with. And churches.
We have a question online. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity and thank you for coming and sharing with this group. I was mind blown when you said, when you started talking about cement, not basements, but cement under cement, foundations under foundations, and having to dig those out. And those were not things that I had ever even come to mind for me as things to be mindful of when thinking of budgeting. As we go about this work, we've talked a little bit about what resources it would need, not just to get the land, but for the land to be useful. Any projections or any more you can share about that will continue to educate me in that space?
Honestly, it's all over the board, and the benefit of a nonprofit, which you will also be, is finding companies in the community that are willing to help. So Innovative Concrete is a company that's like a god angel hero to us because they've been pulling those foundations out for us at very little cost, except the cost of dumping the concrete. So I really can't give you what a market rate cost of that would be very easily. And tree demos, again, like all over the board, depends on the height, how much of it is dead, but to bring it down safely, it's very easy to come to $2,000 to $3,000 for a tree, and that's without the stump being ground up.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Questions? Thank you. Sure.
I just want to thank Ann. Her passion is so palpable. She really has, gets me excited every time I hear her talk. So we did lose one of our trustees, and I know Kay was also needing to step away. So I wanted to field it to the remaining group members, whether or not they wanted us to move forward with the next section of the agenda to go over the tax sale properties within the pilot areas, or if you'd rather with that, we push that to the next meeting just to send it.
Report as well of what we found.
That is up to you. We're happy to move forward and do the presentation or push it to the next meeting.
I think,
Okay.
sorry, this is Alex. I think it'd be best to push it back just so you all wouldn't have to repeat yourself at next board meeting, and that way everyone can ask the questions. I believe two board members are gone, correct?
One of the 4 is dropped off.
So we're down to 3 out of the 7 still
Yeah.
present, right?
I think it'd be best to push it back.
Siobhan agrees. Kay's on board too. Okay, so we will push this portion of the agenda to our next meeting in April. The other item that we're going to have on the agenda next month is a review of the bylaws and administrative policies. Those were developed last year. We really want the Board of Trustees to take some time. We have copies here for members here. We will be sending copies out to the whole group. But if you could, before the next meeting, just take some time to review those. We'd like to have a further discussion as to whether what was put together a year ago still stands, or if we see that we might need to make some adjustments. And then we'll definitely do the review of the pilot area tax sales and that bylaws and administrative policy review. We'll just move that to the next meeting. Okay. If there is no other action, then we can adjourn this meeting early. I do thank everybody for coming out and taking the time to have this discussion today. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Shut up.
Thank you, that was very interesting. Nice to meet you. I just know. I'm not really. I'm 45 now. Unless they're telemarketers, then I get free.
Over here. I have 2 sets of placards.
Sally, Kathy brought that set up of socks.
Oh, okay.